Welcome everyone. Uh, uh, Thank you so much for coming for this event. We lead the Civil Society and Policy Research vertical. The Civil Society and Policy Research vertical is the platform for civil society organizations to come together with the Congress Party. We're hoping that we form a platform where uh, members of civil society, people, professionals in the civil society, have a space where they can come and express and talk about the issues that they're going through. And in this context, we thought that the dilution of the bulldozing of the MGNREGA Act was extremely important to discuss because this was this act has symbolized rights-based legislation, which the UPA government stood for, which the Congress governments have continuously stood for. And this is also an act which came in collaboration with a lot of members of the civil society. And I'm so happy that we have Professor Drèze here, who was part of that. And today, when we see this destruction, it makes you realize that it's not only a destruction of livelihoods, it's also the destruction of a rights based framework, which means we are now being reduced to people, not citizens, but people who are subjects of a government, of a kingdom. And I think this is extraordinarily worrying, and this is something we all have to speak against. I have a really bad cold, so I will request Rachna to introduce the speakers and we will take it forward from there. Rachna, over to you.
Hi, Navika. Uh, just give me a minute. I'm between two devices. So, hello everybody. I'm sorry for this little technical glitch that I'm facing, because of which I haven't been able to log in from my computer. So, without much ado, we are all excited to hear our extremely eminent panel of experts on the topic. And I'll first briefly introduce the format and then the speakers. We've kept the format simple. We'll first have all the speakers uh, sharing their views with us for about 10 to 12 minutes each, followed by a discussion which we would request them to have amongst themselves, because they'll have comments and observations on each other's presentations. And then we'll open the webinar to the audience questions after about 10-15 minutes discussions amongst the speakers. Our first speaker would be Shri Amitabh Dubey, who's a well-known political analyst. He is currently in charge of research and monitoring at AICC Communications Department, and he has been a part of the Indian National Congress's Manifesto Committee for the 2024 Lok Sabha elections, and also a key member of several manifesto committees of various state elections. He was also the ex-president of All India Professionals Congress, Delhi State. Um, Sri Dubey has a BA in economics from St. Stephen's College at University of Delhi and a master's in political science from Columbia University. He also has an MA in international studies from University of Chicago. Our second eminent panelist is Sri Ashok Kumar Pandey, who's a well-known name. He's an acclaimed author, historian, and is known for his writings on modern Indian history and secularism. He runs the YouTube channel The Credible History, which has over 1 million subscribers. He's known for fearlessly speaking on current affairs and issues of critical importance to the public, and he shares his views prominently across various platforms. Sri Pandey has a master's in economics from Gorakhpur University. Our third eminent panelist is Sri James Herenj, who is a prominent tribal rights activist and a social worker from Jharkhand. He is known for his work on rural development, water management, and advocating for MGNREGA and right for food issues. He is the convener of MGNREGA Watch Jharkhand. He studied at Ranchi University and is active in workshops on climate change and provisions for of the Panchayat's extension to the scheduled areas, or the PESA Act 1996. And our last speaker would be Dr. Jean Drèze, who's a well-known public intellectual of our time. He's an Belgian-born Indian development economist. Dr. Drèze studied mathematical economics at University of Essex, and he completed his PhD at the Indian Statistical Institute, New Delhi. He has taught at the London School of Economics and he holds an honorary professorship at the Delhi School of Economics. He's also a visiting professor at the Ranchi University. His work in India includes those on issues like hunger, famine, gender inequality, child health and education, and MGNREGA. Dr. Drèze was a key figure in the drafting of MGNREGA, actually, and as other social welfare legislation like the National Food Security Act and RTI as part of the National Advisory Council of the UPA government. So this is our eminent panel of experts, and without taking any more time, I would invite our first speaker, Shri Amitabh Dubey, to share his views with us. Amitabh?
You're on mute, sir. You're on mute.
All right. Apologies. So thank you, Rachna, for the introduction. Since this is an All India Professionals Congress audience, I want to start with one important point, which is that, there is a false binary that is often made between the world of, social sector, jhola walas, focusing on MGNREGA is often clubbed in that. And then there is the efficient modern sector, so-called, which is the sector of capital, the sector of the middle class. There is this very false binary. And nothing shows the hollowness of this binary than MGNREGA. And let me explain that. MGNREGA is, we've all heard that MGNREGA is a rights-based approach, welfare approach. It is aimed at, the bottom of the pyramid, obviously, the poorest of the poor. But in many ways, MGNREGA is easily one of the most efficient, targeted, flexible welfare programs that this country and even arguably the world has ever seen. And so I want to say that this is a program that ordinarily everyone in this so-called right side of the spectrum should be celebrating. But for some reason, particularly after the latest reforms, there seems to be this very odd binary. And let me explain what I mean by this false binary. Firstly, I want to remind everyone that PM Modi, I think many of you will know, described MGNREGA as Aapki Vifaltaon ka Jeeta Jagta Smarak, which means it's a living monument to the UPA's and the Congress's failures. And then we saw that during COVID, the entire country was dependent on MGNREGA because all of the working class, because the poor planning, the rushed lockdown, which is directly Mr. Modi was responsible for, they were literally walking home. We've all seen the movie Homebound as the most recent reminder of this. And when they got to the villages, what was there to do? MGNREGA is what came to the rescue. The second thing that obviously came to the rescue was the National Food Security Act because they also needed food. And so huge amounts of rations were shipped to every village under the Food Security Act. So this is the reality that this was the fundamental basis of India's COVID response. The biggest crisis we have faced in decades was MGNREGA and the Food Security Act. Now, obviously, Mr. Modi has and the BJP have a very different philosophy. And this is very clear from the bill, the so-called G bill, or the act now. The fundamental difference is power is being shifted from the citizen to the bureaucrat, from those who are predominantly scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, OBC, minorities, women, to people who are the top of the food chain, top of the power structure. And when you look at the bill, you see exactly this. So, for instance, earlier the bill, I'm just going to briefly compare the MGNREGA with the G bill. MGNREGA was universal in rural India. The new bill is going to go to only very specified rural areas, which of course the bureaucrats will decide. The allocation used to be unlimited and demand driven. Now it's going to be based on the budget allocation that someone sitting in a ministry is obviously going to decide. Noteworthy fact is that earlier 90% of the funding came from the center. Now only 60% will come from the center. Now you might say, well, why not? This was a debate that happened at the beginning of MGNREGA also, when it was started in 2005, how much should the central contribution be? And the argument was to make it a real entitlement, a real right. The center will need to fund because states have huge funding issues. And today, states are running into serious budgetary problems. So in the real world, it's very clear that the 40% contribution that has to come from states is now going to be under a lot of questions. On the one side, you're pushing the spending into the states. On the other side, we saw that West Bengal was denied MGNREGA funds a couple of years ago. The government has reduced the fiscal space of states by having cesses, which the states don't get a share of. States get a share of taxes, but when you call it a cess, then it's outside the tax net. And in the next Finance Commission, which decides how much states get periodically, the sense is that state share is going to come down even further. So it's also an attack on federalism, which once again is an example of centralization. Earlier, you could get MGNREGA employment all year round, including in the crop sowing and the crop harvesting season. Now, a lot of farmers used to complain that, this is increasing the wages and it's causing a labor shortage. Now, the issue is that this was actually the point of MGNREGA. MGNREGA, the idea was to give a minimum wage. Previously, you could declare any minimum wage. Even today, you have minimum wages, 400, 500, 600 rupees a day for various skill levels. None of them are implemented. For the first time, MGNREGA was a scheme that actually implemented a nationwide minimum wage. And naturally, if you have an effective minimum wage, labor markets will tighten and farmers will have to pay more. But the fact to remember, this is a transfer of resources from the landed to the landless. All employers complain about minimum wages and wage increases. So the question is, you have to balance these, and the bias is always against the working class, and this was a scheme that created bias in favor of the working class. The other point is that the Gram Sabha was a very important part of the planning of MGNREGA. Now what's going to happen is the PM Gati Shakti plan is going to take precedence. The Gram Sabhas in name will be involved, but in practice, the bureaucrat will be telling them how to do the planning. And then there is going to be, earlier there were limits on how much you could spend on materials because the focus was on labor. Now that balance is being shifted. So contractors will obviously get a bigger chunk of what earlier workers were getting. Many people say, including the Prime Minister has said that this is a scheme where holes are being dug. Now, it is true that there are holes are being dug. But what's happening to those holes? They're being filled with water. The BJP made a big song and dance that in the last few years, we've really replenished water bodies and all of that. Now, if you look at the data, the water bodies were being created on the UPA as well. When you dig a hole, it usually fills up with water unless you're in the middle of a desert. And I myself have been to villages, as have I'm sure all the other speakers, where there are ponds where the water table has come up. So this whole, earlier the BJP was claiming, UPA and MGNREGA was unproductive, ours was productive, although the data shows otherwise. Now they're saying the whole thing is unproductive, and now we have to come up with something that the bureaucrat will control. So the point I'm making is that they will say anything to justify whatever measures they are taking. Now, the last point I want to make is that, and this again, I'm speaking to the binary, the sort of modern versus activist binary, which is completely false, obviously, in the case of MGNREGA. There's been a lot of research showing how this scheme has had a huge impact on welfare. So Karthik Muralidharan and his co-authors wrote a paper in 2017, which showed that household earnings went up 14%. Poverty declined 26% because of MGNREGA, after you rule out all the other causes. And the important point is that there was a huge wage effect, and 86% of the gains came not directly from MGNREGA, but indirectly from the fact that the wages went up in those communities and in those areas. There's even, because the bargaining power of the poorest and the most weak worker went up. And there's one paper by someone in the World Bank that even said that crime levels went down. So, there's huge amount of positive effect. That is undeniable, that is clear. So the only reason to move on from this is because it doesn't suit your political model of empowering citizens. And you want to have centralization, you want to drive the system using your friends who have capital and control it through a smaller number of bureaucrats rather than a large number of Gram Sabhas. So this is the broad, I wanted to make the point that this is actually a very efficient scheme, and that there's a political economy around it. So I will stop there, and I will let other guest speakers make their points. Thank you.
Thanks, Amitabh. I would now ask Shri Ashok Kumar Pandey to share his views if he has joined the webinar.
He hasn't joined yet.
So maybe we'll wait for him, and meanwhile we can ask Mr. James Herenj to share his views with us.
Yes, good evening to all of you. आप सबको झारखंड से मेरा जोहार, नमस्कार।
जोहार।
जैसा कि हमारे अमिताभ भाई ने बड़े ही शानदार तरीके से इसको प्रेजेंट किया मनरेगा की खूबियों को। इससे पहले कि मैं मनरेगा के बारे में बात करूं, मैं शुरुआत ही करता हूं, क्योंकि हम लोग नरेगा के एक हिसाब से जन्म के समय से जुड़े हुए थे, और आज एक तरीके से हम लोग काफी हतोत्साहित हैं, चिंतित हैं कि अब नरेगा आज के तारीख में आएगा नहीं आएगा, ये अलग मनसा भविष्य के घर में छिपा हुआ है। दो साथियों को मैं पहले श्रद्धांजलि देना चाहूंगा, जो हमारे बिल्कुल निकटतम साथी थे, ललित मेहता, जिसकी यही मनरेगा के कारण में 14 मई 2008 को उनकी हत्या हो गई थी, जब जो ड्रेज़ के साथ हम लोग सोशल ऑडिट किए थे। और एक बड़ी जनसुनवाई में सोनिया गांधी ने भी उसके लिए एक शोक संदेश भेजा था। तो ये काफी एक तरीके से जिन्होंने नरेगा का सपने को साकार करने के लिए अपनी जान तक कुर्बान कर दी। दूसरा साथी हमारे थे नियामत अंसारी, जो 2011 में उनकी भी ठेकेदारों ने और असामाजिक तत्वों ने पीट करके उनकी हत्या कर दी, ड्यू टू मनरेगा में जितने करप्शन हो रहे थे। तो उन दोनों साथियों को मैं श्रद्धांजलि के साथ में आज का ये अपनी बात शुरुआत करता हूँ। इस सिलसिले में मैं अपने अनुभव, पिछले 20 सालों का अनुभव शेयर करना चाहता हूँ, जो नरेगा के लिए बहुत ही खास मकसद रखता है। सबसे पहला तो मैं ये देखता हूँ कि चूंकि मैं झारखंड के जिन इलाकों में काम करता हूँ वह पलामू कमिश्नरी है, जिसमें लातेहार, पलामू और गढ़वा है। और आप में से अधिकांश लोग को जरूर जानकारी होगी, आप लोग पलामू का इतिहास के बारे में पढ़ते हैं, तो ये आपका बंधुआ मजदूरों के लिए प्रसिद्ध इलाका रहा है, जहाँ पे भूया कम्युनिटी है। उन लोग को हम बंधुआ मजदूर की तरह जमींदार लोग सताया करते रहे थे, और वो भूमिहीन है। तो स्वामी अग्निवेश का आंदोलन भी 1976 में इसी इलाके से शुरुआत हुआ, और कई भी अलग अलग शोषण के विविध चेहरे मौजूद हैं। तो जब ये नरेगा आया तो उन दिनों में कई ऐसे दलित महिलाएं सामने आई, और उसके बाद में नरेगा के कारण से उनको एक तरीके से अपने आवाज को बुलंद करने का, मतलब एक जमींदार जो एक हिसाब से पीढ़ी दर पीढ़ी शोषण करते थे, उनके सामने अपना जबान नरेगा के जरिए बन पाए। वो कैसे बन पाया? चूंकि 2008 में आपका नरेगा एक तरीके से 2 साल हो चुका था, और नरेगा में काम चल रहा था, और बारिश में जमींदार लोग भी उनको अपने खेतों में काम करने के लिए जब ले जा रहे थे, तो महिलाएं जो दलित टोले में रहती हैं, उन्होंने पूरी हिम्मत के साथ कहा कि आपके खेत में जाएंगे तो आप हमें 2 केजी मकई या 2 किलो मकई या ऐसा मोटा अनाज आप देंगे। जब हम नरेगा में काम करेंगे तो हमको 86 रुपया, इट मीन्स 86 रुपया मिलेंगे। तो ये उन्होंने बार्गेन किया, और सीजन चलता जा रहा था, खत्म होता जा रहा था। अंततः जो शोषणकारी ताकतें उनको पीढ़ी दर पीढ़ी शोषण कर रहे थे, उनको देना पड़ा, चूंकि सीजन खत्म हो रहा था धान का ट्रांसप्लांटेशन का। तो उन्होंने 86 रुपया दिया और अपने खेतों में लगाया। तो ये मुझे लगता है कि एक ऐसा ताकत ऐसे दलित आदिवासियों के लिए मनरेगा लेकर के आई थी, जिन्होंने बार्गेनिंग क्षमता को पहली दफा बढ़ाया 2008 में। ठीक इसी तर्ज पर जब हमने देखा कि मजदूर संगठित हो रहे हैं, उनको संघर्ष करने का ताकत मिलते जा रहा था, और अपनी सफलताएं आगे बढ़ रहे थे। पहली दफा मैंने अपनी जिंदगी में देखा, झारखंड में आमतौर पर पुरुष जो काम करते हैं उनको कूली कहा जाता है, जिस रेलवे में कूली होता है वही लिखा आता है कूली, और महिलाओं को रेजा कह के यहाँ पुकारा जाता है। तो महिला और पुरुष का समान वेतन अगर इतिहास में पहली बार लागू हुआ तो नरेगा के जरिए लागू हुआ। और ये महिलाओं को सशक्त करने का एक बहुत ही कारगर कानून था, जो पहली दफा उन्होंने समान वेतन के रूप में लोगों को मौका दिया। और मैं ये भी याद करता हूं कि जब उन दिनों में ये पलामू जैसा इलाका जहां पे अक्सर ऐतिहासिक रूप से सुखाड़ और अकाल पड़ता रहा था, तो नरेगा आने के बाद में कभी भी मजदूरों को बारिश के सीजन में या सुखाड़ के सीजन में या अकाल के सीजन में काम के मामले में कभी तकलीफ नहीं हुई। जब उन लोग चाहते थे कि हमको काम करना है, तब वो बार्गेन करके सरकारी मशीनरी से काम हासिल कर लिया करते थे। तो सुखाड़ अकाल का जो विपरीत परिस्थिति, विभत्स चेहरा होता था, दाने दाने के लिए लोग तरसते थे, ऐसे समय में ये मनरेगा ने उनको एक तरीके से बहुत ही कारगर और सशक्त मौका प्रदान किया। 2010 के आसपास मैंने देखा कि कुएं बने नरेगा से, और कुआं सिर्फ स्ट्रक्चर नहीं बना, बल्कि दलित आदिवासियों को पहली बार उस तरह के संरचनाओं का मालिकाना हक मिला। मतलब कभी सपने में नहीं सोच सकते थे कि हमारे खेतों में भी, हमारे जमीनों में भी कोई इस तरह का ढांचा बनेगा जिसके हम मालिक होंगे, और मनरेगा में मजदूरी के साथ साथ एडिशनल हम उसमें खेती करेंगे, खेती से हमारा आर्थिक सशक्तिकरण होगा। ये उन्होंने 2010 में जो कुएं बने थे झारखंड में, उसके बाद से महसूस किया। और इसका भी एक स्टडी जो बाद में अपनी बात रखेंगे, उसमें उन्होंने इसका फायदे का कैलकुलेशन भी किया है और काफी पॉजिटिव रिजल्ट लोगों के बीच में आया है। इसी तर्ज पर हम 2017-18 में आते हैं, तो झारखंड में हम लोगों चूंकि काम कर ही रहे थे लगातार, तो यहाँ पे बिरसा हरित ग्राम योजना करके मैंगो प्लांटेशन का स्कीम हम लोगों ने शुरुआत किया। और चूंकि उस समय आपका भारत सरकार के साथ में क्लस्टर फैसिलिटेशन टीम के रूप में हम लोग जुड़े हुए थे, तो हम लोगों ने कई गांव में ऐसे मेहनत करके लोगों के साथ में बागवानी योजनाओं को सफल किया। और आज की तारीख में आपको बताऊं कि ऐसे बागवानी योजनाएं सफल हुई हैं जहां पे लोगों का उसके साथ में एक आत्मिक जुड़ाव रहा योजना के साथ में। और तब आज की तारीख में मनरेगा नहीं भी मिल रहा था, उस समय भी जुलाई के महीने में उन लोग आम को बेच करके न्यूनतम 40,000 से लेकर के ऊपर जितना उनका एरिया है, जितना पुराना होता जा रहा है, उनकी आमदनी बढ़ते जा रही है। सिर्फ आम का खरीद बिक्री से नहीं हो रहा है, बल्कि उसके अंदर में जो इरिगेशन फैसिलिटी डेवलप हुआ और उसके अंदर इंटरक्रॉपिंग हुआ, तो उनके घर का जो सब्जियों का वैरायटी है वो बढ़ा। तो सालों भर एक तरीके से साइकिल उनका चलता रह रहा है कि हमने नरेगा से इस तरह के ढांचों को खड़ा किया। पांचवी बात ये मैं कहना चाहता हूं कि जिस तरीके से अभी हमारे साथी ने बताया कि ग्राम सभाओं का सशक्तिकरण, मैंने कई ऐसे जनसुनवाइयों में देखा है कि जहां महिलाएं एक जनसुनवाई में एक घंटे का जो भी समय मिला, उसमें इतने हिम्मत और साहस के साथ में तो बढ़िया बढ़िया वैसे प्रभावशाली चेहरों का एक तरीके से झुका मांगा, और आइंदे इस तरह की गलती नहीं करने का एक तरीके से सार्वजनिक रूप से सशक्तिकरण का प्रक्रिया, योजना चयन में, योजनाओं के क्रियान्वयन ताकत उभर करके बना था, वो भी अब हमको वो निराशा दिखाई दे रहा है। गांव की तरफ से शहरों को पलायन या बड़े नगरों पलायन होता है, उसमें भी झारखंड के अधिकांश इलाकों में के बीच में रहता हूं, तो वो मुझे साफ साफ दिखाई दिया है। ये बोल करके अपनी बात को खत्म करना चाहता हूं कि जहां पे ग्राम सभा का सशक्तिकरण में निकल करके आया था, और दो घटनाओं को मैं बिल्कुल यहां जिक्र कर रहा हूं। वैश्विक आर्थिक सुनामी जिसको हम लोग बोलते हैं, उस तरीके से हो रहा था। तब प्रभाव हमारे इलाके में तो ज्यादा नहीं पड़ा, क्योंकि लोगों के हाथ में परचेजिंग पावर।
मुझे लगता है कि नेटवर्क का थोड़ा इश्यू है, पर वो कंक्लूड ही कर रहे थे।
So I think let's hope
जब
कि
आपका पेंडेमिक से पूरा आर्थिक गति में लोगों ने कमा करके, और इतने हमेशा जीवन रेखा साबित होती रही थी नरेगा, लेकिन अब वो आज की तारीख में अब इतिहास का विषय बनने जा रहा है। एक बड़ा सवाल है कि क्या हम लोग उस ऐतिहासिक सफलताओं को वापस लाने में किस हद तक कामयाब हो सकते हैं। यहाँ जो भी दर्शक हैं उन सबके लिए भी एक सवाल है, और हम लोग के लिए भी एक सदमे का घड़ी है। तो मैं चाहता हूं कि इस तरीके का जो परिस्थिति उत्पन्न हुई है उससे हम लोग कैसे संघर्ष का साहस जुटा सकें, वापस नरेगा या नरेगा जैसे सशक्त कानून लेकर के आ सके। ये हमारा भविष्य के लिए एक सबक भी होगा, एक सीख भी होगा, और उम्मीद भी हमेशा कायम रहेगी। तो बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद हमारी बात को सुनने के लिए, और जो भी सवाल होगा मैं लाइन पर बना हुआ हूँ। थैंक यू।
बहुत धन्यवाद जेम्स जी, आपके बहुत बेशकीमती इंसाइट्स जो कि बिल्कुल ग्रास रूट से हैं उनके लिए। आई नाउ वांट टू इनवाइट श्री अशोक कुमार पांडे जी, who I think has joined to share with us his views. अशोक जी, आप हमें सुन सकते हैं?
जी बिल्कुल, मैं सुन पा रहा हूँ। मेरी आवाज आ रही है?
हाँ, आपकी आवाज आ रही है।
सॉरी, मैं बिल्कुल भागता दौड़ता आया हूँ। माँ की तबीयत थोड़ी खराब हो गई थी, इसलिए लेट ज्वाइन किया मैंने। आई एम रियली सॉरी फॉर दैट।
तू फक्त फोन राहत होतं ना एकदम, तुम्ही जास्त जलबाजी केली काय? नाही.
हाँ अशोक जी, प्लीज आप शुरू कर सकते हैं।
जी जरूर। बहुत शुक्रिया, आप सब लोगों का बहुत स्वागत, बहुत शुक्रिया बुलाने के लिए। मनरेगा जब आया था तो बेसिकली इसको काम के अधिकार के रूप में जाना गया था। द फर्स्ट थिंग जो सबसे ज्यादा हम लोगों को अट्रैक्ट करने वाली थी कि राइट टू वर्क की बात हुई थी, कि लोगों के पास काम करने का अधिकार है। बेरोजगारी, खासतौर पे रूरल बेरोजगारी जो है, मुझे नहीं लगता है कि आंकड़ों में बात करने की जरूरत है। हम सब जानते हैं कि रूरल, हमारा जो पूरा डेवलपमेंट का मॉडल खासतौर पे 90s के बाद हुआ, वो सेंट्रलाइज्ड हुआ, डिसेंट्रलाइजेशन लगातार कमजोर हुआ। बड़े शहरों में जो मेट्रोस थे वहां पर जो एम्प्लॉयमेंट पैदा हुआ वो हुआ, लेकिन गांवों के अंदर छोटे उद्योग बंद हुए, जिनको हम कॉटेज इंडस्ट्री कहते हैं, वो लगातार बंद होती गई। उसके चलते गांव के अंदर रोजगार के लिए कुछ खास था नहीं, है नहीं, अभी भी नहीं है कुछ खास। खेती है कुल मिला जुला के। खेती जिस तरह से लगातार छोटे छोटे फ्रैगमेंट्स में बढ़ती चली जा रही है, बहुत सारे लोग जो मझोले खेतिहर थे वो धीरे धीरे मजदूर में बदल गए। जमीन, बिना जमीन वाले मजदूर, जिसको भूमिहीन मजदूर हम लोग कहते हैं, उसमें बदल गए, और खेतों की मजदूरी और इसके अलावा कुछ नहीं है। इसलिए गांव से बड़े पैमाने पर हमने पलायन देखा है। मैं कश्मीर पे काम करता हूँ, कश्मीर लगातार जाता रहता हूँ, और यहाँ शायद कुछ लोगों को ये जान के आश्चर्य हो कि कश्मीर की खेती हो या कश्मीर में कंस्ट्रक्शन का काम हो, ये सारा का सारा यूपी, बिहार और बाकी जगहों के मजदूरों के भरोसे चलता है। और कश्मीर में सर्वेंट, मेड सर्वेंट रखने का कोई फैशन नहीं है। वहाँ घरों में मेड सर्वेंट बहुत मुश्किल से मिलेंगे आपको। लेकिन कुछ जो एफ्लुएंट घर हैं, वहाँ जो आपको सर्वेंट मिलेंगे वो भी आपको बिहार, झारखंड या यूपी से ही मिलेंगे, लोकल सर्वेंट्स नहीं होते हैं। पंजाब की पूरी खेती यहाँ के किसान, यहाँ के मजदूरों के भरोसे होती है। फैक्ट्रियां कितनी चलती हैं वो सब हम जानते हैं। आप नोएडा से लेके बैंगलोर, मैं गुजरात में काफी टाइम रहा हूँ, कहीं भी आप अगर इंडस्ट्रियल इलाके में जाते हैं तो आपको सबसे ज्यादा जो मजदूर मिलेंगे वो हमारे ईस्टर्न यूपी और बिहार से ही मिलेंगे। ये सारा पलायन जबरदस्त रहा है हमेशा से। और नरेगा एक ऐसे योजना के रूप में आई थी जिसमें आपको रोजगार डिमांड करने पर रोजगार मिल सकता था, गांव का पलायन थोड़ा बहुत रोक सकती थी। और अभी मेरे पहले जो वक्ता बोल रहे थे उन्होंने इशारा भी किया कि पेंडेमिक जिस समय आया हुआ था उस समय हमने देखा कि मनरेगा ने कितना बड़ा सहारा सरकार को भी दिया, मजदूरों को भी दिया। हमने देखा कि हमारी जो बड़ी इंडस्ट्रीज हैं, हमारी जो ऑर्गेनाइज्ड और अनऑर्गेनाइज्ड इंडस्ट्रीज हैं, वो 3 महीने भी अपने लेबर्स को अफोर्ड नहीं कर पाई जब उनका प्रोडक्शन बंद था, जब उनका सेल बंद था। तो मजदूर कितनी बड़ी संख्या में पलायन करते हैं, पलायन करके अपने गांव में जाते हैं, और उस समय मनरेगा एक सहारा बनती है। नरेंद्र मोदी जब से सत्ता में आए हैं, मनरेगा को लेकर उनके कमेंट जिस तरह के हैं, वो हमेशा ये समझ में आया है कि मनरेगा उनको कुछ खास पसंद नहीं है। मनरेगा जिन लोगों को नहीं पसंद है, उनका सबसे बड़ा जो लॉजिक होता है, आप उसको लॉजिक कहना चाहें लॉजिक कह लें, कुछ और कहना चाहें कुछ और कह लें, वो ये होता है कि गांव में रोजगार मिल जाता है तो फिर वो मिनिमम उनको वेज मिल जाता है, उससे कम वेज पर वो बाहर काम करने के लिए तैयार नहीं होते हैं। तो पीक सीजन में जब आपको लेबर चाहिए होता है, उस समय सस्ता लेबर आपको नहीं मिलता है, उनकी डिमांड्स बढ़ जाती हैं। जो इंडस्ट्रीज हैं, उन इंडस्ट्रीज को लेबर जो है उतना सस्ता नहीं मिलता है जितना चीप लेबर वो चाहते हैं। हम जानते हैं कि इंडस्ट्रीज बाकी कुछ तो चीप नहीं कर पाती हैं, लेकिन लेबर जितना चीप हो सकता है उतना चीप वो रखना चाहती हैं। तो जो हमारा कैपिटलिस्ट क्लास है वो हमेशा से मनरेगा जैसी जो योजनाएं हैं उनके खिलाफ रहा है। एक अजीब सा लॉजिक दिया जाता है कि इसमें इतना सारा पैसा लग रहा है, जबकि मनरेगा तो अपने आप में प्रोडक्टिव स्कीम है। मनरेगा में तो वो कुछ बनाते हैं, गांव में सड़क बनाते हैं, कुछ और बनाते हैं, तो वो ऐसा कोई स्कीम नहीं है जिसमें आप पैसा केवल लुटा रहे हो। बाकायदा उसमें एक कंस्ट्रक्शन या कुछ भी आपके सामने, या तो तालाब छोटे खोदते हैं या सड़कें बनाते हैं, तो एक प्रोडक्टिव आपके सामने स्कीम है जो प्रोडक्शन भी करती है और बहुत सारे लोगों को रोजगार भी देती है। तो नरेंद्र मोदी जब से आए तब से ये राइट वाला जो अप्रोच है उसको कमजोर करते जा रहे हैं। ये बहुत क्लियर है कि राइट वाला अप्रोच जो है, जिसमें अधिकार की बात होती है, नरेंद्र मोदी की सरकार आने के बाद से लगातार कमजोर कर रही है। जैसे एक एग्जाम्पल 5 किलो अनाज का। हम लोग जब छोटे थे, मैं मिडिल क्लास फैमिली से हूँ, यहाँ और भी लोग बहुत सारे होंगे जो मिडिल और लोअर मिडिल क्लास फैमिली से होंगे। हमें तो राशन मिला करता था। आप राशन लेने जाते थे, आपको अनाज मिलते थे, अलग अलग तरह के, शक्कर भी मिलता था आपको, साथ में मिट्टी का तेल जिसको केरोसिन ऑयल कहते हैं वो भी मिलता था। और यहाँ तक कि मुझे याद है कि जब हम स्टूडेंट हुआ करते थे तो कॉपीज मिलती थी सस्ते दाम की, जो सभी के लिए अवेलेबल होती थी। वो राइट की तरह था। अगर राशन वाला गड़बड़ी करता था, कभी अनाज लेट आता था, तो लोग जाकर वहां पर शोर मचाते थे और अपने अधिकार की तरह राशन की दुकान से अनाज पाने को समझते थे कि ये हमारा राइट है। लेकिन आप जब उसको 5 किलो अनाज सरकार दे रही है तो राइट को आपने भीख में तब्दील कर दिया। सूचना का अधिकार था, सूचना का अधिकार कमजोर करते करते अब वहां पहुंचा दिया गया है कि कंप्लीटली आपके पीआईओ के ऊपर डिपेंड करता है कि वो आपको कौन सी इंफॉर्मेशन देता है, नहीं देता है। इतने लंबे समय तक सूचना आयोग का कोई अध्यक्ष नहीं था, केसेस जो होते हैं वो महीनों महीनों चलते हैं, सालों बाद आपका नंबर आता है। तब तक कई बार तो वो जो इन्फॉर्मेशन आपको चाहिए होती है वो इन्फॉर्मेशन ही इररिलेवेंट हो चुकी होती है। आप जाके पता कीजिए कि अपील पर, फर्स्ट सेकंड अपील पर कितने लोग पहुंचते हैं। कई बार मेरा अपना आकलन है, जितना मैंने देखा है, कि 30-40% लोग सेकंड अपील पे पहुंचते हैं। वो इतना लंबा टाइम हो जाता है कि लोग भूल ही जाते हैं कि हमने कोई आरटीआई लगाई थी। और बाकी जो कमजोर किया जा रहा है थर्ड पार्टी वगैरह करके, तो वहां एक राइट जो दिया था कांग्रेस ने, राइट टू इंफॉर्मेशन, उसको खत्म किया गया। राइट टू एजुकेशन, जब आप लगातार सरकारी स्कूल बंद करते चले जाएंगे, नए स्कूल खोलने की जगह लगातार सरकारी स्कूल बंद होते जाएंगे, तो राइट टू एजुकेशन अपनी मौत मर जाएगा, उसको कुछ और करने की जरूरत है नहीं। राइट टू वर्क बचा हुआ था नरेगा से, और नरेगा जिसको मनरेगा बाद में नाम दिया गया, तो राइट टू वर्क बचा हुआ था। और खास तौर पर पेंडेमिक्स के बाद तुरंत मनरेगा को हटाना या मनरेगा के साथ कुछ छेड़छाड़ करना बहुत पॉसिबल नहीं था। तो अब जाकर मनरेगा के साथ छेड़छाड़ की गई है। उसका जो नाम बदला गया है उस पर तो मैं कोई बात करना ही नहीं चाहता हूं, क्योंकि वो इतना बेवकूफाना है। अगर उसको आप पूरा पढ़िए, विकसित भारत, और ये तो हिंदी अंग्रेजी का ऐसा खिचड़ी उसमें पकाई गई है अपना मन पसंदीदा एक्रोनिम लेने के लिए, कि उसमें हंसी आती है। तो उस पर तो मैं कोई बात ही नहीं करूंगा, ठीक है, वो नाम बदलते रहे। असल में उसके भीतर जो सब कुछ बदल दिया गया है, राइट वाला अप्रोच खत्म कर दिया गया। आप कहते हैं 100 दिन से बढ़ा के 125 या 120 दिन, जितना भी आप कह रहे हैं, लेकिन स्टेट गवर्नमेंट के ऊपर जितना ज्यादा बोझ डाल दिया गया है, अगर आप गौर से देखेंगे तो बीजेपी की अपनी स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स के कई सारी जगहों पर, जैसे एमपी में मैंने देखा कई बयान आए जिसमें कहा गया कि राज्य सरकार के पास पैसे ही नहीं है। अब जब राज्य सरकार के पास पैसे नहीं है ये कहा जा रहा है, तो ये इसीलिए कहा जा रहा है कि मनरेगा का जो अब वीबी जी राम जी है, उसका खर्च उठाने के लिए उनके पास पैसा ही नहीं है। पीक पीरियड में आपने कह दिया कि पीक पीरियड में काम नहीं मिलेगा, यानी पीक पीरियड में अब उनकी मजबूरी है कि जो बड़े किसान हैं या दूसरे दूसरे स्टेट्स के किसान हैं, उनके यहाँ जाकर वो काम करें और सस्ते में काम करें। जो रेट उनको मिले, कॉम्पिटिटिव रेट जिसको कहा जाता है, जिसमें लोवेस्ट रेट मिलता है, हमारे यहाँ हाईएस्ट रेट नहीं मिलता है, उस रेट पर जाकर काम करें। और बाकी के लिए आपने सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट को सीधे कनेक्ट कर दिया। जो पंचायती राज योजना राजीव गांधी लेके आए थे, जिसमें सारा कंसेप्ट ये था कि पंचायतों को अधिकार दिया जाए अपने विकास का, अपने तरीके चुनने का। तो किसान पंचायत से कहते थे, पंचायत देखती थी और उसके बाद काम अलाट होता था, नरेगा का पैसा अलाट होता था और काम होता था। ये पूरा सिस्टम खत्म हो गया। सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट, स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स अपने तरीके से करेंगी और 40% चूंकि स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स को देना है, और स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स के कॉफर्स जो हैं वो पूरी तरह से खाली हैं। चाहे वो बिहार में 10,000 रुपए महिलाओं को देने वाली स्कीम हो, लाडली बहना स्कीम हो, और इस तरह की दुनिया भर की जो ये इस तरह की स्कीमें लाई गई हैं, जो बेसिकली इलेक्टोरल स्कीम्स हैं। इन स्कीम्स के बाद गांव स्टेट्स के पास पैसे हैं ही नहीं कि 40% उसका खर्चा उठा सके। तो ये कहें कुछ भी, बातें जो भी हो, नाम तो मेरे ख्याल से इसलिए बदला गया कि सारी बहस नाम के अंदर चली जाए, लेकिन मनरेगा को इन्होंने पूरी तरह से खत्म कर दिया है। और नाम बदल के अच्छा ही किया, क्योंकि ऐसी स्कीम महात्मा गांधी के नाम पे होना महात्मा गांधी का भी अपमान होता, जिस स्कीम में अब तय है कि किसानों को न रोजगार मिलेगा, न रोजगार उनका अधिकार रहा, न पंचायतों के पास ये हैसियत बचेगी कि वो तय कर सकें कि मनरेगा के तहत क्या काम होगा, और ना स्टेट्स के पास इतना पैसा है कि 125 दिन तो क्या 100 दिन का भी मनरेगा दे सके। तो ये जो कैपिटलिस्ट हैं, शहर के कैपिटलिस्ट हैं, गांव के कैपिटलिस्ट हैं, कस्बों के कैपिटलिस्ट हैं, उनको सस्ता मजदूर उपलब्ध कराने के लिए, जितना सस्ता मजदूर हो सकता है उतना सस्ता मजदूर अवेलेबल कराने के लिए, और गांव के अंदर से मास जो आपका माइग्रेशन होता है उसको और ज्यादा बढ़ावा देने के लिए, ताकि वो शहर में आए और इन ह्यूमन हालात में मिनिमम मजदूरी से भी नीचे के रेट्स में किसी भी तरह से कम पैसों में मोदी जी के जो पसंदीदा लोग हैं, जो कैपिटलिस्ट हैं, उनके लिए वो काम करें। गांव की सारी सामाजिक संरचना है वो नष्ट हो। इन सब प्लान्स के साथ वीबी जी राम जी आया है, और मुझे लगता है कि 1948 में बापू की हत्या हुई थी, और अब उनके नाम पर सेंट्रल की जो सबसे बड़ी स्कीम थी उसकी हत्या हुई है। ये रोजगार देने वाली नहीं, जान लेने वाली स्कीम है। इसके बाद गांवों में डिस्ट्रेस बढ़ेगा, पलायन बढ़ेगा बहुत बुरी तरह से, और गांव का लोकल जो विकास का काम है वो भी बुरी तरह से प्रभावित होगा। अगर किसी को फायदा होगा तो सिर्फ और सिर्फ शहर के कैपिटलिस्ट को फायदा होगा, जिनको सस्ते मजदूर मिलेंगे। मुझे लगता है अभी मैंने सोचा था कि मैं कुछ लिख लूंगा, तैयार करके रखूंगा, लेकिन अभी मैं इतना ही कह पाऊंगा। बहुत शुक्रिया।
थैंक यू अशोक जी। फैमिली इमरजेंसी के बावजूद आप आए और आपने अपने व्यूज शेयर किए, उसके लिए बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। I would now invite Dr. Jean Drèze to share his views with us. We have all been waiting for very long to hear you, sir.
Thank you, Rachna. I have been disconnected a couple of times since the meeting began, so I hope I won't be disconnected again. But if I am, I will be able to join again quite quickly. The previous speakers, Amitabh, James, and Ashok, have already spoken very well, both about the importance of Employment Guarantee and the Employment Guarantee Act, and also about the problems with this new act, the VB-GRAMG Act, which is truly a kind of bulldozer act, both in the terms of the process through which it was passed, without prior notice, within one day, without going to a standing committee, and so on and so forth, in sharp contrast with the long process of transparent public deliberation that brought the Employment Guarantee Act in 2004. There was for a whole year, the act was discussed, revised, improved in all kinds of forums, first among social movements, then in the National Advisory Council, then in government and outside government, in the Prime Minister's office, in various ministries. Then a version of it was tabled in Parliament on 21st December 2004. After that, the bill was referred to standing committee, which incidentally was chaired by Kalyan Singh from the BJP and included members of parliament from most parties. That committee held very inclusive deliberations, submitted a very good report after a few months, And then when the bill came back to Parliament again, there was discussion for weeks. And finally, the act was passed unanimously in Parliament. It's interesting not only to think of that process in contrast with the way this new act was bulldozed in Parliament a few days ago, but it's also interesting to think that that process would be impossible today. That today, the democratic space that we had at that time to make this kind of deliberation possible, including many street protests in Delhi and so on, that space doesn't exist anymore. So that's one respect in which this is a bulldozer bill. And the other respect, of course, is the way in which it makes a clean sweep of NREGA, the Employment Guarantee Act, not only the act, but also all the rules, notifications, schemes, orders, everything is being swept away in one go. But not from today, but from the day when the new scheme comes into force. And this new scheme is basically a centrally sponsored scheme at the discretion of the central government, with the central government keeping all the powers, the power to notify where and when the scheme comes into force, the power to determine the financial allocations, the power to determine the wage rates. All the powers are with the central government. And so far as I can see, the central government does not have a single significant legal obligation under this act. All the obligations have been palmed off to the state governments. So it's not an Employment Guarantee Act. I mean, if the central government can switch on and switch off the guarantee whenever and wherever it likes, it's not an Employment Guarantee Act. By the way, there was at one point a switch-off clause of this sort also 20 years ago in the draft Employment Guarantee Bill, and we had to campaign very hard and very long to make sure that this was removed. And that's why we ended up having a strong Employment Guarantee Act. I want to say a few words about action now, because I think what is important now is action and what to do. And since many of you, I believe, are associated with the Congress, I'll say a few words in particular about what the Congress and Congress activists and sympathizers can do. First of all, we have to be clear that it's going to be a big battle. And especially in the next few weeks, I think there's going to be a huge propaganda war, because the central government and the BJP are going to try very hard, and they're going to use all their propaganda machinery to try to sway the people and convince them that this is not a repeal of NREGA, it's an improvement or a revamping of NREGA, which is the opposite of the truth, of course, as we have already discussed. For this purpose, they are using to the maximum the sweetening of the bill in the form of this extension from 100 days to 125 days of employment. They have used that SOP as a way of trying to convince people that this act is revamping employment guarantee. Now we have to be clear why this is misleading. One reason, of course, is that only 2% of rural households in India get 100 days of employment today under NREGA. And so it's only that small minority of 2% that stands to gain from an enhancement of the ceiling. Because if the ceiling is not binding, then raising it doesn't make any difference. That's point number one. And point number two, this extension from 100 to 125 days is quite symbolic when the financial restrictions go in the opposite direction. As you know, in the new act, the central government gets to determine financial allocations for each state. They are called normative allocations, but I think de facto they are like ceilings, because beyond that allocation, the states have to contribute 100% of the costs. And even within that allocation, they have to contribute 40% of the costs. So this new financial formula is going to restrain employment guarantee. And that is far more important than the cosmetic extension from 100 days to 125 days. So we have to be prepared with our arguments, and it's very important to prepare a lot of material in simple language that people can understand, so that they get a correct understanding of what this new act is all about and how destructive it is. Secondly, I want to make a general point about the fact that the Congress has been somewhat missing in action in the last 20 years on this subject, not only on employment, but I think the Congress has not been very good at understanding the significance of the initiatives it took in the UPA years, not only Employment Guarantee, but also the Right to Information Act, the Food Security Act, the Forest Rights Act, and so on. These were very important initiatives. It's a very important effort to create a kind of foundation for a social security system in India. But the Congress has not been very good at understanding the significance of this and claiming credit for it and defending these entitlements. That applies in particular to the employment guarantee. And not only has it, I think, been found wanting in terms of defending the Employment Guarantee Act, but I'm sorry to say that at least in Jharkhand, some Congress MLAs have been part of the nexus of corruption and have participated in the siphoning off of NREGA funds instead of trying to help people to claim their entitlements under the Act. So this is really a chance for the Congress, I think, to mend its ways and to unite behind the Employment Guarantee Act and to use all its strength to defend it. And it's also an opportunity to mobilize its cadres, because the Congress, I think, has a lot of ground cadres, but I'm not always very clear what they're doing. So this is a great opportunity to activate them and to mobilize them around this critical issue for which you can get a lot of popular support. Thirdly, right now, I feel that the important thing is to revolt against this new act. And the state governments in particular have very good reasons to revolt, because the central government is unilaterally imposing on them a legally binding financial burden. I mean, the state governments now have the responsibility to ensure that there is adequate funding, possibly beyond the so-called normative allocations. So it's very unfair to impose that burden unilaterally without any consultation with the states. The states have every reason to oppose this new act. And you can even argue, I am told, that this act is unconstitutional, because under Article 258 of the Constitution, if the government imposes a legally binding financial obligation on the states, as it is doing now, then it must be done by consultation. And in this case, there were no consultations. So I think it's important to revolt in very strong terms. You have 6 months to do it, because under this act, the states have to put a new scheme in place within 6 months. And in the interim period, NREGA continues as it is. So you have 6 months to revolt and try to persuade the central government that this act will not do and that you're not prepared to implement it. Fourthly, I think that for the same purpose, it would be good to have some kind of coordination between states, not states fighting individually for themselves, but also some kind of collective voice from several states, like, for example, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, West Bengal, Punjab, and so on. I know that all of them, all these four, have already protested in some way. Jharkhand, of course, also, by the way. All these 4 or 5 states have already protested in some fashion. But I think if they did it in a united way, that would have a lot more strength, and that would make it difficult for the central government to impose this legislation on the states. Fifth, I think it would be very good to have demonstrations at the block level all over the place. The block is the unit of implementation of NREGA, and it is a easier level to work on than panchayats, because you can mobilize good numbers and you can have more visibility at the block level as well. So everywhere where the Congress has a significant presence, I think it would be very good to have mass demonstrations at the block level, and of course, if possible, also at the district and at the state level. And the final point I'll make on action and mobilization is that I think that, of course, it's going to be a long battle. We have to be prepared for the long haul, and we need a strategy for the long haul. But I think it's also very important right now to sustain the protests that have begun day after day, so that the momentum and the energy that has been created by this crisis is not lost. Because people's attention span these days is very short, and there's a risk that if the momentum of action doesn't continue in the next few days and few weeks, people's attention will turn to something else, then will be lost. So these are just some suggestions. I am hoping to hear many more in the discussion, and that we can move towards some kind of consensus on what needs to be done, because the important thing right now is action. I think the understanding we have, but we have to all come together and oppose this objectionable act.
Thank you, Dr. Drèze. In our format, we had kept some time for a discussion amongst the speakers following after having heard each other. So if all four of you have any questions or comments for each other, we would like to take that up first before we open the floor for the audience's questions.
There's a question about, there was a question addressed to me about whether the states can go to court. I had some brief discussions with lawyers. I think probably they can go to court. The question is whether it's a good idea and what will come out of it, because there's a risk that, first of all, there's a risk, of course, that the court will not take our side. But even if it does, there's a risk that the court will say, okay, this financial formula needs to be tweaked, and otherwise this act is fine. So we have to think about the consequences and not just about the legal arguments. But yes, I think they can go to court, and I think some of them or some lawyers are already thinking of going to court. So it's important to be part of that discussion, I think.
I guess then we can go to some questions in the audience.
We have
Pallavi, you were saying something. Yeah.
We have some people raising their hands, and then we can go to the chat questions on the chat as well.
Okay, yeah.
Shall we take the ones who are raising their hands?
Yeah, sure. So,
Bilal from Telangana.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the speakers for sharing their thoughts. To all the speakers, I would like to do, are Indian policymakers or economists thinking in this direction of creating an independent fund wherein the state or the central can't barge into the funding for MGNREGA?
Who would want to take that question, Mr. Drèze? Because
sorry, can you explain that again?
Yeah, are the policymakers or the economists thinking in this direction wherein we are going to create an independent fund for MGNREGA, wherein the central government or the state government can't barge into their working style or working condition, wherein the fund is being, for example, the contribution which we've been discussing it about 60%, 90%. So that creates a disturbance between the state and the central. So looking forward for the centralized fund wherein the states can access, wherein the center can also contribute to that fund.
I'm not aware of any plan to this kind of mechanism, and I'll be very surprised if anything like this is put in place. In the case of NREGA, the initial understanding was that there would be a separate non-lapsable fund that would ensure that there's always money to pay the wages. And that has not really been done. I mean, basically, the Employment Guarantee Fund nominally was created, but it just became another budget line. And so there was a fixed budget every year. And when the budget was exhausted, the workers had to wait for the following financial year before being paid. This has been a tremendous problem with NREGA, because when workers have to wait for months for their wages, they lose interest. And when the workers lose interest, you cannot save this program. So I'll be very surprised if an innovative financial mechanism is put in place for the purpose of the new act. I think more likely the central government will determine the allocations according to its own criteria and priorities. It will supply its 60% and make that part of its budget. And then it will say, we have done our job under the act. Now it's for the states to take charge. I doubt very much that the center will go beyond that.
Krishna?
Thank
Do
you.
you have any?
Krishna, please raise your hands if you have to ask a question.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Dr. Drèze. This is a point that has been raised by a lot of people, but I wanted your opinion on this. In this new act, they have actually stopped enrollment and carrying out of projects during the planting season. So what will be the effects of this on wages and what is your, I would rather ask for your opinion on this decision. Thank you.
मेरा सुझाव है कि जेम्स पहले इसकी आपके सवाल का जवाब दें। जेम्स को कहना था कि जो 60 दिन तक का जो एम्प्लॉयमेंट गारंटी का डिसकंटिन्यूएशन का जो प्रावधान है, जिससे 60 दिन तक नरेगा नहीं रहेगा, इसका प्रभाव क्या होगा, थोड़ा अगर आप बताएं, फिर उसके बाद में थोड़ा अपना टिप्पणी रखूंगा।
यस यस, ये चिंता हमारी भी लगातार बनी हुई है, क्योंकि जो प्लांटेशन का वर्क होगा वो एग्रीकल्चर सीजन में ही होगा, मतलब जुलाई टू सितंबर अक्टूबर तक ही मेनली होगा, तभी हम प्लांट को बचा पाएंगे और प्लांट का ग्रोथ भी और उसका जो जीवित रहने का परसेंटेज होगा वो बेटर रहता है। लेकिन साफ साफ इसमें कहा गया है कि एग्रीकल्चर का पीक टाइम में उसका जो बुआई और कटाई का समय होगा वो उस सीजन में वो जी राम जी बिल के हिसाब से काम स्थगित रहेगा। तो पूरी तरह ये प्लांटेशन स्कीम सिर्फ झारखंड का मैंगो प्लांटेशन बल्कि पूरे देश के लिए जो रोड साइड प्लांटेशन है, अदर काइंड ऑफ प्लांटेशन है, वो बुरी तरह प्रभावित होगा, क्योंकि प्लांट आपका 60 दिन का इंतजार नहीं करेगा जिंदा रहने के लिए या इरिगेशन के लिए या और भी सर्वाइवल के लिए। तो ये प्लांटेशन स्कीम तो बुरी तरह प्रभावित होने वाला है। बस
तो इसमें मुझे एक जोड़ के एक क्वेश्चन पूछना है आपको। तो ये किया क्यों गया है? क्योंकि उनको भी पता है कि वो टाइम पे अगर काम नहीं करेंगे तो ये होगा, तो उनको एक्सप्लॉइट करने के लिए किया गया है, क्योंकि फिर उस समय पे उनको काम करना ही पड़ेगा, पैसे तो आने ही पड़ेंगे घर पे। तो किस लिए किया गया है?
आई थिंक हाँ सॉरी, जहाँ जेम्स बताइए।
हाँ, मतलब मैं तो उसको दूसरे रूप में जवाब देना चाह रहा था कि उनकी बुद्धिमत्ता ही उस लेवल का नहीं है। अभी तक वो नरेगा में जब वो क्लाइमेट चेंज के ऊपर में मिटिगेशन का रिपोर्टिंग करते रहे हैं, तो मनरेगा से जो प्लांटेशन हो रहा है उसको बड़े गर्व के साथ में रिपोर्ट करते रहे हैं। लेकिन ये प्लांटेशन उनके ध्यान में ही नहीं रहा होगा, हमको लगता है, ये जब इसका डिजाइन कर रहे थे। तो ये उनकी विधिमत्ता मारी गई है, उनकी बौद्धिक क्षमता के ऊपर बड़ा सवाल है। जी जो
मैं कह रहा था कि in this new act, basically there are quite a few spanners in the wheel. I mean, the tendency is to put as many spanners in the wheel as possible and to weaken the employment guarantee as much as possible. And many other provisions like that. This continuation for 60 days is necessary. In any case, उस समय लोग नरेगा का काम नहीं करते हैं। जब इनको फसल के समय या बुआई के समय कमाने का मौका है, उनको नरेगा की मजदूरी से बहुत ज्यादा मिलता है, तो बहुत कम लोग उस समय नरेगा का काम करना चाह रहे हैं। तो फिर इस कानून को डिसकंटिन्यू करने का कोई मतलब ही नहीं है, और इससे कॉम्प्लिकेशन बन जाएगा। सो दिस इज अ पॉइंटलेस कॉम्प्लिकेशन। और उसी तरह और कई प्रावधान है, जैसे एक प्रावधान कहती है कि हर 3 साल में जॉब कार्ड रिन्यू करना पड़ेगा। तो इसका क्या, व्हाट इज द पर्पस ऑफ दिस, व्हाट प्रॉब्लम आर यू ट्राइंग टू एड्रेस? I mean, it's for poor people, it can be quite complicated to renew a job card, especially because now they will have to give not only their name, address, and so on, but also their bank account details, other details, and insurance number. So ये इतना आसान नहीं है लोगों के लिए. So why? You know, what problem are you trying to address? So basically, these are just complications that are being put in to maintain the program as much as possible. I think that is the game.
Pallavi, we have some questions in the chat.
Yes.
There is one question by Tanveer for Amitabh, and he has one for Dr. Drèze also. So we can probably take up the first one first and then the next one.
Yes.
Tanveer, if he's in the call, maybe he could ask his question himself.
I can see
Tanveer,
the question.
Yeah. Oh, you can see the question. All right.
Yeah. So his question is about the supply of work at the rural level under the new law. Basically, the whole point of the reform is to reduce the wage bill. The government obviously is facing financial pressures. Apart from Mr. Modi's philosophical difference, reluctance to empower the weakest citizens, the idea is to save money. So that's why the budget is being pushed onto the states. That's why there will be a budget cap. And if the desire is to save money, then obviously the wage pressure will come down. The minimum wage effect of MGNREGA will come down. You'll remember that in the 2024 manifesto, the Congress party said that we will raise the wage, which is currently between 250 to 350 rupees. We will raise it in different states to 400 rupees a floor, and that would have had a very positive wage effect. Clearly, the whole point of the reform is to lower the wages. And what happens when you reduce wages or reduce payments is migration goes up. So the bet is to get a lot of these workers to maybe go into urban areas, so then they are no longer taking advantage of MGNREGA. So basic point is to save money, in my opinion.
Thanks, Amitabh.
Yes, I think John wants to say something.
Hello. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, Tanveer, we can hear you.
Thank you so much for the answer. No, my question was that, of course, there is a provision which says that, of course, which would lead to migration of the workers from rural to urban areas. But how much, this whole bill, or rather the whole law, is driven by the market? Because I think bureaucratic discretion, of course, would have a lot to do with the market playing a major role at the rural level as far as the work is considered, right? Earlier in MGNREGA, market was not, because it was demand driven, so market was not a major player. But what do you see? Do you see that there's a market intervening in the whole concept of the new law?
No, clearly the whole philosophy of this government is to leave it to market forces, because what a minimum wage does, which is what MGNREGA is, it puts a floor, and therefore it creates a slight gap in demand and supply, because now the wage is higher, so then the person who wants the worker has to pay more money. So clearly the idea is to go into a lower market clearing wage. And therefore, of course, the supply will go down because people may not want to work at that low wage. So it's clearly an attempt to move away from this intervention into a free market system where the worker and the wage laborer will be suffering the most.
AGR?
That was actually the reason I asked the question about planting season and why they have stopped enrollment during planting season. So I would thank you, Amitabh, for bringing this up, because as far as I could understand it, it would take out the floor from the labor market during planting season, and whoever wants to get labor would be able to dictate their prices. All right, thank you.
Thanks. There is another question in the chat for Dr. Drèze, which is about from Gautam. Gautam, if you are in the webinar still, you can ask your question yourself, or I could read it out. He doesn't seem to be around. So the question is, मनरेगा के मुद्दे को नागरिकों द्वारा राष्ट्रीय स्तर पर जन आंदोलन कैसे बनाए? पदयात्रा, सेमिनार इत्यादि, आपके सुझाव?
मैंने कुछ सुझाव तो दिया है, और मुझे उम्मीद थी कि आप लोग भी और कोई सुझाव दें, क्योंकि बहुत कुछ करना है। धरना प्रदर्शन, लिखना, पदयात्रा, जो भी हम सोच सकते हैं करना चाहिए। So I'm actually hoping to hear more suggestions. हम लोग अपनी तरफ से कर रहे हैं जो हम कर सकते हैं. I think very important, first of all, is to go to the workers and to understand their thinking, because they are the ones who can mobilize in numbers. और अभी स्पष्ट मेरे लिए कम से कम स्पष्ट नहीं है कि लोग क्या सोच रहे हैं, क्योंकि पिछले कुछ दिनों में उनके पास अलग अलग तरह का आवाज आया होगा. Some must have heard that this new act was a great thing. Some must have heard the critiques. तो इनका सोच क्या है और इनका नरेगा का कितना कमिटमेंट है, क्योंकि कई मजदूर थके भी हुए नरेगा से, क्योंकि इनको पैसा नहीं मिल रहा है खास करके. तो ये सब समझना जरूरी है. तो उनके पास जाना, उनका समझना, उनसे बात करना, उनको समझाना और मजदूर संगठनों के साथ काम करना, मुझे लगता है कि हमको वहीं से शुरू करना चाहिए. I want to add something to the earlier discussion about क्या करना चाह रहे हैं, क्या इनका क्या प्रयास है, क्या उद्देश्य है. I think ये समझना इतना आसान नहीं है, because there are no details of the new scheme in this act, and it's not very clear what they have in mind, what they are trying to do. I think one possibility is that they want to promote this PMAY model, the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana model, where NREGA just becomes the labor component of other centrally sponsored schemes. I think it's very possible that this is what they have in mind. And in fact, there's a section in Schedule 1 or Schedule 2, which not many people have noticed, but it's a very important section. वो कह रही है कि all the projects under this new scheme will be in convergence with central and state schemes notified by the central government. So the central government will decide which schemes are converged, and then NREGA will become the labor component. And another aspect of this is that in these converged schemes, contractors will be allowed. NREGA contractors are not allowed. So I fear that this may be the new approach. And then, NREGA will just be a kind of appendage of these other schemes. And of course, all these schemes will be used to promote the Prime Minister, because any social policy today of the Modi government has to satisfy 3 conditions. One is it should not cost us much money. Second, it should involve digital technology to the maximum. And thirdly, it should promote the Prime Minister. So I think NREGA is becoming like that also.
Yes.
Thank you for bringing up this point, Dr. Drèze, that
We
the
will take your comments later.
central...
Krishna, there are other people waiting for questions. We'll come to
Okay,
comments
please go
later,
ahead. I'm
You've had
sorry.
your chance. Yeah, thanks, Krishna. AGR, you have a question?
So the fourth one I would like to add is the center or the PM would like to control how he is diverting that attention so that just before election he get the publicity. So my question is, there were allegations that the previous MGNREGA, there were a lot of corruption which was happening. So the question is, in the new act, is there any provisions that prevent such corruption to happen? And if yes, are those provisions not a clandestine way of promoting and rewarding their own people so that they continue to support BJP? So that were the consolidated question with respect to the new provisions. Sir, you are on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, I was saying that I'm not sure about the last part of your question, but I'll try to address the rest. Corruption is definitely more than an allegation. I mean, there is a lot of corruption in NREGA. We will be the first to point this out. But what is important to understand is how it happened and why it happened. There was a time, about 5 years after the act came into force in 2006, when corruption had been very significantly reduced. We have evidence of that. For 2011-12, we have 2 national independent household surveys, the National Sample Survey, the 68th round of the National Sample Survey, and the 2nd round of the India Human Development Survey. And both of them show that the bulk of employment generation in NREGA was reflected in these independent surveys. So the leakages were not very large, except maybe in a few states. So it's very important to remember that there was a time when we had made very significant progress with the battle against corruption. And then corruption, unfortunately, came back again, especially in the last 10 years, for various reasons. But one of them is the single-minded reliance on digital technology, not just digital technology, but I would say inappropriate, unreliable, immature technologies to fight corruption. And the result of that has been that corruption came back again. And now coming to your question, unfortunately, no, the bill, as far as I can see, does not contain any new provisions that would help to contain corruption. On the contrary, it again puts all its eggs in the technological basket. The word digital comes 35 times in this bill. And at every step, they are advocating biometric authentication, Aadhaar payments, digital technology, artificial intelligence, and so on. And the recent experience is not encouraging in that respect. We have to return to more participatory anti-corruption methods, and we have to have a more discriminating use of digital technology. Digital technology can certainly help in some cases, but it can also cause a lot of problems and a lot of exclusion problems. And the reason I think why these technologies have been so ineffective is that they have brought so many complications in the system, and especially in the wage payment system, that the workers are fed up. And when they are fed up, what they do is they collude with a local thekedar who pays them every day on the dot and fudges the records and extracts the money from the system. And then the thekedar gets his share and they get their money and everybody's happy. This is a very dangerous situation where the workers are being dragged into the nexus of corruption. And fighting that is a big battle, and we need a very serious, informed discussion on how to contain this. But just putting all your focus on more and more of this over-sophisticated technology that actually benefits the companies more than the workers, I don't think that's the way to go. So the short answer to your question is no, I don't think there's much in this bill that will help to curb corruption, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. There is one view that I saw in the chat, which is of a different kind. It's by Varna. Sorry, if somebody is saying something, just a second.
भ्रष्टाचार को लेके आपको कुछ जो नहीं है
जी,
क्योंकि जेम्स ने सोशल ऑडिट पर बहुत ज्यादा काम किया, बहुत काम किया है, तो इस पर अगर इनका कुछ कमेंट है।
नहीं, थोड़ी जितना मैं समझ पाया उसके हिसाब से करप्शन का जो मामले आते रहे हैं उसके दो प्रमुख कारण हैं। एक तो प्रमुख कारण ये है कि नरेगा इतना ट्रांसपेरेंट है कि हर कोई उस चीजों को सवाल कर सकता है, तो सवाल करेगा तो स्वाभाविक तौर पे वो चीजें सामने आती रही। नंबर एक। नंबर दो कि जो तकनीक उसमें इजाद किए गए हैं, जैसे ट्रांसपेरेंसी के मामले में मुझे लगता है कि दोनों साथ साथ पैदा लिए थे, सूचना का अधिकार और उसके बाद में नरेगा, तो चीजें इतने ट्रांसपेरेंट है और गांव गांव हम लोग ट्रेनिंग देते रहे थे कि कैसे आप चीजों को देख सकते हैं, एक एक चीज को, एक एक मजदूर का नाम को, एक एक स्कीम को, एक एक कार्यस्थल को, तो लोग हमेशा सवाल करते थे। तो इसीलिए बड़ा सवाल बना करप्शन का, मतलब सवाल उठते रहे हैं, ये एक चीज है। और तीसरा चीज यही है, जैसे जो ने कहा कि सोशल ऑडिट का इतना मजबूत प्रोविजन था, जहां जहां पे इसका ईमानदारी से ग्राउंडिंग हुआ, लोग उसमें इन्वॉल्व होते रहे, तो वो तमाम लोग इसके खिलाफ में बोलने का हिम्मत किए। बाकी दूसरी योजनाओं में भी है, लेकिन जितना आपका नरेगा लोगों के बीच में पॉपुलर हुआ, सिविल सोसाइटी के बीच में पॉपुलर हुआ, रिसर्चर के बीच में पॉपुलर हुआ, बाकी योजना उस तरीके से ना आपका ट्रांसपेरेंट है, ना आपका वो लोगों के बीच में गया है, तो इसलिए उन चीजों पर अभी उतनी बहस नहीं हो रही है। तो मुझे लगता है कि ये ट्रांसपेरेंसी और लोगों के पॉपुलरिटी का एक पार्ट है कि इतना करप्शन लगातार उजागर होते रहे। जी,
I think
वरना का एक लास्ट क्वेश्चन लेंगे।
yeah. So is Varna in the chat still? I think yes, this can be the last question. There was this question about so he's basically asking that any one of the speakers to shed light on what they think can be done to or proposed to be done about the implementation, he's calling it implementation failure, as opposed to changing and abandoning the whole idea of MGNREGA. So, I mean, it's rather a broad blanket kind of question. And so something like, if this wasn't changed to, G Ramji bill or act, then what kind of other changes could have been made to MGNREGA to improve it, so to say? I think that's what the question asks.
Amitabh, would you want to take this question, and then Mr. John Drèze and James? Amitabh? I think, yeah. I think there's a network issue. He dropped off. Yeah.
I think he dropped off. So
Yeah,
I guess it's
yeah.
I guess it's a very blanket kind of question, and
Yeah, I think we'll move
not
towards
really.
Varna. Varna, do you have a question? Are you still on the call? If you're still on the
Yeah,
call,
Pallavi.
then
Yeah.
please ask the question.
Yeah. So I mean, I think this particular question sort of like Professor John Drèze actually already answered, but I did ask a question earlier on, which is that in my perception, basically, I think one of the beauties of MGNREGA was that it allowed self-selection, and that's very different and helps solve sort of the identification of poor problem, which is a very difficult problem in development economics. So my question to Professor Drèze was that because it's now a scheme and it's no longer an entitlement in that sense, do you think that there's going to be also politics around the identification of poor itself? BPL has been weaponized before in the history of this country, and so is that something that is likely to come back in a big way now that this has become JRMG? Yeah.
I think it's possible. Everything is possible. You are right that even in 2004, after the NAC drafted the Employment Guarantee Bill, the government introduced a provision to restrict eligibility to BPL households. So even at that time, this was an issue, and then that was taken out later. So this time, we don't know. They may come up with new poverty criteria, or they may not. We'll have to see what happens. But yes, it's possible. To address the other question briefly, let me first enlarge the point that was made earlier in the context of corruption. I was saying that in the new act, there's nothing that will help to address corruption. And actually, it's a larger point. I don't see anything constructive in this new act. I don't see anything that will help to address any of the implementation issues. And of course, there are many implementation issues, including corruption. And of course, also very importantly, the payment issues and complete failure of the central government in the last 15 years to put in place a payment system that works and that is timely and reliable. So I think it's important to see that this is not a constructive bill. It will not help to address the implementation issues. As far as the implementation issues is concerned and what can be done is concerned, I feel that on the whole, NREGA was okay. I think the act was okay, but we have to. I think it's in the implementation that a lot of work needs to be done. In particular, as I said, trying to revive more participatory methods of fighting corruption. I think James has also spoken about that. Reviving the RTI for that matter. I mean, the RTI is almost dead now. You get all kinds of vacuous answer to RTI queries. So it's quite ironic that the same government that is destroying RTI and also, by the way, destroying social audits by not funding them is suddenly talking about corruption. So this is one thing. And then fixing the payment system, as I said. I mean, it's not rocket science, for heaven's sake. I mean, why can't the government put in place a working payment system and stick to it? Because the problem is that the system keeps changing. It began with cash, then it was post office, then it was banks, then it was particular banks, then PFMS, EFMS, NEFMS, Aadhaar-based payments. Every time there are so-called teething problems that sometimes last for 1 or 2 or 3 years. And by the time they are resolved, a new system is put in place and new teething problems start. Why not just use ordinary bank payments? I mean, I don't see any purpose in these Aadhaar-based payments. Return to ordinary bank payments and stick to it. I think that will be a great service to the workers and it will help to save in NREGA. So there are things that can be done. On corruption, by the way, I would also add, very importantly, take action on the culprits. This is the most important thing. You can do as many social audits as you like, you can have as much transparency as you like. If you don't punish the people who are siphoning off money, and it's quite a crime, I mean, to steal money intended for poor people who have worked hard for it, that should be considered a serious crime. And this government puts all kinds of people in jail at the drop of a hat. I mean, if you demonstrate in New Delhi without permission, you risk being sent to jail or being charged under UAPA. But these crooks are siphoning off huge amounts from poor people and not getting punished. I mean, that would, I'm sure that would have a dramatic impact if a few corrupt contractors were caught and sent to jail from time to time. So there are things that can be done for implementation without amending the Act. And the Act, of course, can also be amended if necessary without repealing it. I mean, what is objectionable is this wholesale repeal. So, yeah, I think I'll end here and let others supplement if they wish.
Thanks, Dr. Drèze. I think we have taken most of the questions, and we've also reached the end of our webinar. Pallavi,
I have one very practical question actually, because Mr. Drèze, like you rightly said, it's going to be a long battle. A lot of us who are Congress karyakartas and many Congress ourselves don't know much about the struggle. और जेम्स जी जो आपका जो संघर्ष हुआ है ये नरेगा लाने में ही, और आपने दो साथियों के बारे में भी बताया जिन्होंने शहादत पाई इस पूरे ये करने के लिए, तो उसके बारे में शायद उतना इंफॉर्मेशन नहीं है. तो क्या कोई ऐसा किताब है या फिर कोई एक जगह है, डॉक्यूमेंट है जो आप हमको सजेस्ट कर सकते हैं जो हम पढ़ें नरेगा के बारे में, जो हम कांग्रेस कार्यकर्ताओं को भी बता सकते हैं और अन्य लोगों को भी? जेम्स और जॉन, आई थिंक दोनों के नेटवर्क में शायद थोड़ा
स्क्रीन इज फ्रोजन, आई थिंक
दोनों के
हाँ, दोनों के हम उनसे बाद में लेकर के भी ये कर सकते हैं. I think we can conclude now, Pallavi, if you suggest.
हाँ, जेम्स जी.
अच्छा, जेम्स जी is here.
हाँ, जेम्स जी आपका ना नेटवर्क तो ये फ्रीज हो गया था.
मैं वही बोल रहा हूँ कि हाँ, मैं ये कह एक साहित्यकार या एक जिस तरीके से कुछ बातों को संस्मरण के रूप
जेम्स जी मैं आपसे एक रिक्वेस्ट करूं कि
डॉक्यूमेंटेशन नहीं किए हैं.
जेम्स जी आपका ना वीडियो अटक के आ रहा है, अगर आप वीडियो को ऑफ करें तो आपका आवाज शायद कंटिन्यूअस आ सकता है, नेटवर्क अच्छा पकड़ेगा. हेलो,
I think we've lost him. And Dr. Drèze has also dropped. Dr. Drèze is back. He's here. I couldn't see him earlier. So, do you suggest we conclude now? We can take the reference of the document from James D. later on.
Yeah, it's a very small thing.
So, thank you everybody for staying on for this discussion, and thanks at the most to all the speakers. Dr. Drèze, thank you so much for joining us, and James G. The other two speakers had to leave, I think. I would also want to thank Tanveer and Priyanka for helping us reach out to the speakers. Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody, Navika, Pallavi. Thank you. And we look forward to more such ThinkLab sessions in future.
Yes, we ought to do. It's a long battle, like John mentioned, and we will have to do sessions where we will know about the history of NREGA itself, right? A lot of people still know about it. So right from that to solutions, a lot of meetings on solutions, because I think one thing that Congress people can do, which John, you rightly said, is at block level do more activities. awareness activities. I think that is one key things we can immediately do. Some amount of awareness through documentation, etc. AIPC can definitely do that, right? We have our agri vertical, which can clearly, as in has to take this up, which we will for sure going forward. And of course, the civil society and policy research vertical as well. So the engagement will be long and we will be here.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you very much,
Namaskar.
Rachna, for holding this entire meeting together.
Thank you so much, Pallavi, for all your help. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks to you and Navika.
Thank you.
Thanks, Navika. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Rachna. Thanks, Pallavi. Thanks to everyone. Thank you.
Bye.